Hello, good morning or good afternoon to all of you out in the audience. Thank you for joining us today for the 9th episode of Screens Unscripted. This series of fireside chats is meant as an opportunity to explore innovations and trends in digital signage and display technology, one of my favorite topics, with industry subject matter experts. As always, I continue to see familiar names out in the audience. I'm incredibly impressed and I'm humbled to see some of you coming back. So for those of you returning, thank you. Welcome back. We appreciate you coming back to yet another episode here. But since we do have some new names out there in the audience, let's do a quick little intro of who I am and what we're doing here. My name is Jonathan Braun. I'm the principal of Braun Consulting, director of the Digital Signage Experts Group, and I'm on the board of directors of the DSF. I must make sure I don't avoid this. I don't want to get myself in trouble because I will get lynched in the parking lot if I do. We have to thank Sony, our absolutely critical sponsor for this series. They're an advisory council member to the Digital Signage Federation, and without them, we couldn't make this work. So I greatly appreciate their support. Now I'm going to do one last thing before I ask our guest to introduce himself, because I know that's who you're all actually here to listen to, not me. That's okay. I'm not offended. I've met me before. It's okay. But we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping real quick. So one, everyone's on mute. You probably gathered that from the announcement when you logged in, but that's okay. Please use the chat or Q&A boxes to communicate with myself or our esteemed guests. Any questions you'd like to ask, I will help facilitate those towards the end of our talk today. That should be in the right-hand side of your screen. You'll have a GoToWebinar toolbar. With that there, if you moved it, you're on your own. As always, sorry, I have no idea where you put it, so you'll have to figure that out. 2, we will be recording this. I always get the questions, so I'll make sure we cover that for you. We are recording this. We will be offering that recording out after we finish. You're going to share with any of your colleagues. You'll get a notification from the platform to go view the video, so you have a link. But Sony, as awesome as ever, is being kind enough to host these on their YouTube channel, so you can also share that from there. We absolutely encourage you to go check out the previous sessions. It's easy for me to say. Getting tongue-tied already, it doesn't bode well. I'll get my act together. I swear I can English. So you can go check out all the rest of the sessions and the other outstanding guests we've had. Also, since you've probably gathered this is a series of ongoing discussions with industry luminaries like our great guest today. So stay tuned for future episodes. We have a bunch more planned for everybody. But also, if you do have any suggestions for topics or guests you'd like to see come on the show and have me talk with them, hey, you know what? Shoot us an email. We would love to hear that. We appreciate the feedback, and we want this to be informative for you. Okay, enough of me. We have a very special guest today with us from TAD, and since I finally get to chat with a fellow consultant and on one of my favorite topics, I'd say I'm actually looking forward to the conversation as much as probably a bunch of you out in the audience are. So first of all, John, thank you for being here. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what TAD does for those not familiar with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it. So John Reeves, I am the co-founder of TAD, Technology, Architecture, and Design. We are a design agency focused around all things media and audiovisual, located in New York and London. We have been in business for 15 years, and I do have a passion for all things AV, and I think digital signage is something that has evolved over the number of years. And like you, Jonathan, I'm actually excited to kind of talk a little bit about where we think it's going beyond what it's called. Digital signage is kind of like a bit of a sad name, really. It's like, you know, so it's a lot more than that. And I'm excited to kind of like start unpacking it, and hopefully, and as we kind of go through our chat, we can kind of like highlight some of the things that we've been up to as well, so you can get to know us a little bit more. But I've been in the and I've been in the business for a long time, so 20 plus years in the kind of audiovisual business. So it's gray beard, lost my hair, you know, and everything else, but still having fun and doing what I love. So that's a cool thing.
Outstanding, and I love to see the passion. Obviously, it's something I share. I've been doing this for a long time myself, and I like that. I like that you called out the digital signage as kind of a sad name for it. I think there's a bunch of us who've been in the industry now for decades at this point. I don't know how many collective centuries we can bring with all of our experience, but it's really funny. We get together and we have this conversation. This, by the way, was the unscripted part of Screens Unscripted to all those out in the audience, because we didn't plan any of this. We really don't do an enormous amount of prep. This is meant to be off the cuff, so you get the real hot takes from our guests and myself. But I know we've talked about it in the past, just like at different Digital Signage Federation events or at InfoComm. We need to come up with a better name. I've never come up with one. I'm terrible at naming things, but we really do, because it's evolved a lot, right, over the last, well, especially the last 10 years, but since really the inception of the concept of digital signage. And I like how it's been changing, it's been evolving, and how we approach it is different. And actually, that's kind of where I'd like to start today, because we used in the description, we used the term experiential and experiential design when we were talking about our session today as kind of the core thing we wanted to cover. But I think one of the challenges that our audience is going to have is they hear that term used a lot because it's become a buzzword. Not quite as bad as AI, but it's become a buzzword. And I think I'd really like to start with a little bit of level setting for our audience to see, how do you define experiential design in your approach, so that we can kind of start there as a good basis. So what do you envision that as?
It's a great question. I think, experiential design, I mean, it always comes back down to like the user experience, right? I think it's, everything kind of revolves around, is it actually allowing us to do a better job? Is it informing people better? Is it actually being useful? Is it a tool? And I think experiential design is about the process, right? It's about the process of trying to figure out, am I in an airport? Am I in a corporate setting? Am I in a retail store? Let's start there. What is the space that I'm working in? And then figuring out, okay, experience design. Okay, so who we trying to deliver an experience design for? Okay, well, we have children, we have parents, or we have workers, we have guests, we have VIPs, travelers, whatever that persona is. We start thinking about their journey within that space, and we start synthesizing, what are the various technology touch points that they would have throughout their journey. And I think that's experience design, right? And it could be, a really fun exhibit. It could be, an informative piece of signage, wayfinding, or it could be something instructing me to be more collaborative, or tell me to do my job, or more focused, right? There is, and I think that's where, that's the art of experience design. It is the collection, or the collective of data points and canvases that are interfacing with us as personas, going on a journey within a given space or place. And that, to me, is experience or experiential design. And once you've kind of figured that out, you can start tuning specifically what is the purpose of that particular canvas. Okay, I am between terminals and it's the food court, or whatever it's going to be. I need something, fun, directional, informative. And, what are the creative ways that I can actually start presenting some information back to those folks? So, that is experience design. So like you as a consultant, everything comes back to design. And, we always follow this old process that's been around for many years: discover, define, develop, and deploy. It's the kind of the four circles of kind of design, and it's been around for thousands of years, from designing buildings to anything. And that kind of discovery phase is kind of that fun part, but it's, that is the collective of experience design for me. So I always tie it back to a designer's perspective.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think about it similarly. I don't always use the exact same terminology, but I do think about it similarly when I'm working with my customers and we're doing any kind of design work. I like the approach, the way you described it, where we're thinking about the technology journey, because historically digital signage was such a simple concept, right? I'm replacing a static sign with a digital one to make it faster, to make it cheaper, to make it more efficient. But we've changed how we're approaching that, and it's how we interact with the technology. And this is a bigger lesson, I think, than just digital signage. I'm sure that also works across other practices that your organization does in AV in general, because that same philosophy, that's about designing a conference room too, or a interactive kiosk, or you go through the whole list, a classroom, like we were chatting about earlier before the broadcast started. There's opportunity there. And does this kind of design philosophy really truly enhance the user experience? I mean, is it better at improving engagement? Do you have any examples that you might be willing to share with the audience? I know that's a tough one. I don't want to put you on the spot there, but I always have to ask, because I like to share real world stories if I have one.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think, I like where you're going because, when I talk about that experience design and I talk about those kind of the four processes to get you to that design, let's take a screen. And I gave that example of the airport, but I think one that's probably more closely related to my world is, a corporate screen, right? Or something that's within a workplace. And, you know, it's not just about, the room is ready, right? Or, click here to start dialing, right? I think today we're more used to tailored messages,
Mhm.
and this idea that you can be a little bit more personal and engaging, right? So in the residential world, everything is very friendly and this kind of warm family environment that people like Apple and various others have kind of created. I think when we kind of step outside of the residential world, we go into the commercial world. What we've seen in corporate settings is people use a lot of the kind of the smart building iteration and various other things that are happening out there, but it's the digital signage part of it is just the output, right? And everything that feeds it could be a series of sensor data that is tied to a particular experience, tied to a particular output, and then informing the room like, hey, hasn't been active for a while, or there is meeting activity, or the current climate within the room is not appropriate, or maybe change the room, or be more instructional, or even just inform that the people within that space. A while back, here in New York, a couple of years ago, we had the forest fires from North America coming across, and you know air quality was a really big concern for a lot of people. And for that brief moment in time, a lot of these Class A buildings that were housing all of this information, being able to broadcast to people within the facility, to the conference rooms or wherever these signage screens are, that the air quality is actually, at a 35, so much better than what it is outdoors or at your own home, shows multiple things. It shows that the corporation is actually caring about the individuals, that the information is now, informing the end user. So that use case is that this signage screen that, 5 years ago would have just been a very dumb room, time, just it wasn't informing. I think of these screens as a way for corporations and places and spaces to inform people, and actually it becomes the language of that corporation or that space,
Right.
and it's a way. I always feel like, in the old days we said like, what's the Siri version of your building? It's like, how is it communicating back to you? And a lot of the time these screens would remain dark, and thankfully these screens today are more, sustainably built, more power efficient and so forth. So they run at a much lower power usage, and, was
Right.
making sure that we're being sustainable in our approach. But during normal active hours, the screen can be doing so much more than just informing about a meeting coming up. So, for us, we've seen a number of corporations really, take note of that. It's eyeballs, and it's an area of getting someone's attention. So we've done that in corporate settings, essentially, using smart technology, sensor technology, VMS technology, weaving it all together through an agnostic aggregator, and then being able to inform a CMS that can then deliver that information to that screen. So that's how we kind of try and work it.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense. And it's funny because we have kind of an informal game of buzzword bingo we end up playing whenever I do a new episode of this. And you hit a couple of them already there
Oh
that,
no.
like talking about triggers and analytics and metrics, because that's something that's come up in previous episodes where we've spoken with some CMS vendors where they bring up that concept as part of changing the experience that the audience has, even though the audience isn't always necessarily the direct customer. It might be the customer's customer or something like that in a retail media network, but still, that idea of delivering that more personalized message makes it more engaging. And then when you do disseminate other information, like, oh, this room is available, but they are used to going to that screen to get like air quality information, that helps increase the kind of stickiness and the effectiveness of
Yeah.
that touch point, right? And I
Right.
love the wildfire example hit a little close to home. I live in San Diego, so
Mm.
We definitely are used to dealing with that, and I hear you, by the way. I would sweat whenever we bring up that topic because the
Sorry.
locals get panicky. But no, it's absolutely valid. We saw that same thing here too, where now all of a sudden companies are thinking about what air quality and integrating that into climate control, or integrating that into statistics analysis of usage of the space and thinking about these things, and that makes it more multifaceted. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, but that does bring a question. So it's easy to highlight the corporate aspects of this, but is this type of kind of design philosophy, does it work across all market verticals, or are there ones where it's less important, like maybe a corporate? Obviously we're seeing how that could be done, but is there a particular other verticals that it might not be as effective, or is it really just down to it works really well everywhere?
I think that's a great point. Corporate, like it's interesting, corporate setting, and that can include life sciences, financial, legal.
Sure.
I think they're all trying to explore these things, right? Because they have. I think they're all trying to discover ways of employee engagement, and the return to office is a big thing here. I think if we step outside of that world, the one that's really obviously very successful, retail,
Mhm.
which is normally a very big brand backdrop, but areas that I see, coming online that could really be more intuitive in regards to the design process is probably healthcare. This idea that, the idea of, not just wayfinding, but this idea of leveraging arts,
Sure.
leveraging light, announcing shift work and various other things, like, appreciation of the work that's going on for like the doctors and nurses, but not just for the patients itself, right?
Right.
I think this is necessarily answering your question, but I see other verticals, needing this type of change. And in order to kind of do that, there needs to be, smart integrated technologies to be informative. I find a lot of signage is still very static and quite stale, and I think that's, especially in those kind of larger industries, which could really benefit from kind of a brand refresh, work with HR, work with policy, work with content production, and we're already seeing it. I mean, everyone's called content is king, right? I mean, that's always been the joke for many years since Comcast days. But this idea that there has to be more focus on tailored messaging is one thing, but it being a little bit more generative, tied back to sensorial and more data-driven experiences, which was actually a part of our little trade show that we had at TAB this week. It was all about data-driven experiences. What is that? Well, data-driven design, and this idea that highlighting shift work, highlighting people, highlighting how can we be a bit more intuitive about how can we direct messages and make these screens a little bit more than just a display, with corporate messaging. So in our world, I still see so much corporate messaging or just stale. There's signage being allocated in various locations, high traffic areas within spaces, and but I think we've still got a long way, which is exciting for our industry because there's still more to be done, more to be unpacked. For how do we kind of develop these things further and make them a little bit more in tune with the consumer or the person that's within that screen? I don't know if that
Yeah,
necessarily
that's
answers your question, but
really good. Yeah, I mean, that's what I like, is this idea of we're going from, like, we kind of to danced around with the name of digital signage isn't necessarily as effective as
yeah,
it once was. We're transitioning away from like a more broadcast style medium where I'm just taking a message and I'm putting it into a space and I'm using a different method of transport, but my method of communication is still very similar, right? When you mentioned like some of the brand plays and things at retail, where I'm just getting a brand for, like an Apple or a Sony
right.
or someone, and I'm putting a brand out. Got to give the sponsor shout out again. But we put that brand advertising out there, and it's about building a simple connection, but it's not engaging necessarily. It's communicative, but it's not engaging. And now what we're really discussing is that personalized, multi-level, multifaceted messaging that does help, because we're now talking about the overall experience, right? So that kind of brings to mind, what about when we're trying to build more interactivity with our viewer? That's got to still be a consideration, right? Because we're going to build some kind of two-way method of communication where we want to drive that engagement. This has come up in more than one previous episode as an important idea. What are your thoughts in that area?
Oof, it's a good one. I think it really depends on the vertical that I'm in, right? And I think
Sure,
we
that
can
would.
kind of we can break signage up into a few different worlds, right? I think there is obvious things like wayfinding,
Right.
navigation, right? That is,
Learn.
even I do it all the time at shopping malls, like, burp, I need to get, need to get to that store extremely quickly. I'm not, I'm a classic person of going in and getting out. Um, I have, if I go back to the kind of the corporate world again, there's not a lot of interaction, right? Because people just want information tailored to what what they're about. So I think things with like kind of like near field communications, this idea of, leveraging kind of, tracking, persona data. I mean,
Right.
it's this whole Big Brother thing again, without saying the word AI or anything like that. But,
Oh, we'll get
you
to
know,
that one.
oh, good. So I believe, I think the relationship between digital signage and network design, with near field communication and, kind of Wi-Fi triangulation and various other things, and being able to intuitively display something for a particular person that is looking for something that they exactly need at that time, I think is critical. Nobody wants to go through a series of pages, right? So
Right.
I feel if, the world of digital signage, similar to my kind of smart building analogy in the corporate, right? We have to start leveraging these other systems that can inform more intuitive, direct feedback for people for engagement. I think the other part of it, and we have seen this, we've got a couple of examples that we've done in the past where kind of machine visioning as an option where, you don't have to touch the screen, but the screen senses presence and, figures out that actually someone is there and is ready to, like, hey, can I help you? This idea that, you know, and I think a lot of it also has to come back to content design, not just
Sure.
CMS design, but the actual
Right.
content, which, shameless plug, we do have a digital experience group here. But, how you lay out that interface, how do you top layer the data that is most needed for that person at that time? Nobody wants to do multi-click. And I remember this in the old age of AV, when we used to have
Oh,
touch panels and various other things in the conference
yeah.
room. Every client said, like, how come I have to do 10 pushes to turn on this device?
My remote at home is like one button push and it turns
Right,
everything
right.
on.
And it's like, now we just have, like, I go to Netflix, it turns on my TV, raises my volume, and I go to the thing I want. And so for all these years that I've been in this industry, we've been talking about less page clicks, less click-throughs. So this idea that, digital signage is now my UX or is my UI into, a particular thing, whether it be navigation, food service, direct to me somewhere, you've got to really think a little bit about what is it that I'm trying to get. It's quite high level. It's quite simple data. We're not solving high level math there. We're just giving people
Right.
very basic information, digital locker, presence to my workers, where am I going, what's on the menu, I think, and navigation for that matter. So this idea of this near field, working with, mobile IT environments and kind of syncing those together as kind of an holistic strategy when thinking about delivering a better engagement, that's what I see. I think without getting too far down the road, right, there's also different forms of digital signage, right? There
Right.
is what I call maybe, human form, right? So something that is approximately the same size as me
Yeah.
standing up, right? So I would consider that a informative directory, signage versus something that is completely immersive or surrounding, an iconic building, a stadium, right? So there's different levels, right, of, engagement and what it means. And I think that's something where, you know, and we can come on to that a bit later on. But that's, I have to compartmentalize it, because when I do think about signage, I break it down into kind of clear blocks, and I think about it based on that user journey I was talking about earlier. Is from the start, the impact to engaging and secure, to navigate, to MySpace, to collaborate, to big work, one to many, right? There's all of those various touch points, and every one of these little canvases could either be this big or
Sure.
50
Yeah.
feet wide. So I think detailing out all of those little signage endpoints, their specific size, and then kind of listing that out based on that persona journey, I think is kind of critical. But
Yeah,
putting the design process
absolutely.
back in
And I like the idea of the digital signage becomes part of your UX for the space.
there. Yeah,
That's a really cool idea. I'm going to borrow that. I will give you credit for it, but I'm going to borrow that because I
I hope
love
so.
that concept, and
Yeah.
I think it's really important. But I do want to poke at something. So you're painting this great picture of, no pun intended, of all these different types of screens and things, but that brings up something I'm really curious on your perspective on, because we always get, and I am guilty as charged, the black rectangle on the wall when it's not being used. Yes, I'm being terrible. I
Oh,
don't have any content on there. I should have the Screens Unscripted logo on there when I'm doing this. But we run into this from a physical integration standpoint. How do we optimize when we're working on design to better integrate into the physical environment? I think that's an area where a lot of people are really genuinely falling short and could probably use more guidance from organizations like yours on, because we get people who just basically say, I'm going to throw a wall mount at it, throw a screen up on the wall, and that's the end of the consideration. So maybe that's
hmm.
something we could explore a little bit further.
Yeah, and here's the reason I liked you. This is my second time meeting you, so I have to say, because I always call it the deli screen problem, right? It looks like
Yeah,
somebody just put up a menu board. So I think when we think about engagement, right? Not only are we talking about the UX or the digital side of it, you hit the nail on the head. It's its architectural integration. Is
yeah,
it a part of the space, and is it organically a part of the space? And I'm trying to think, I think cars do this very well, right? If I mean, well, some cars anyway, but as a
right.
car guy, but I feel that you know, when you look at dashboard design, or you look at lighting design, or a lot of consumer products, right? They're just beautifully, as a product, it's holistic in design. The trim works with the screen, down to the linear relationship, down
It's
to
not
the
just
edge
bolt
detailing.
on, just a big block just stuck.
Yeah, exactly. And so I feel that when you think about engagement, right, it's the UX, which is the digital side of it, the physicality, the footprint of it, and then also how it's being presented to you. And this is where the world of architecture and interior design really comes into play. And I think us as designers, and for anyone that's on the call, right, that's when we have to really work more closely with our interior designers and our architects. We've got incredible architects out there. And when it comes to digital, there's always this kind of like, oh, boop, there it is. I've got a little place for it. It's going right there. It's little 16:9. It's very happy. But, over the last several years, and interior designers can get a little miffed, but you can say, listen, I want to talk a little bit about how this is being integrated. Is it on let's not do a niche. Let's do an open wall. Is the wall darker, right? Is there a different contrast ratio? Is it do not put a screen on a white wall. The other thing that I'm starting to see is, which, I don't know if I coined it or not, but I used to love calling it technology as furniture, or furniture as technology. And this idea, and there's a lot of great companies out there. You've got folks like, Arden and Leon, all these other wonderful companies that are looking at fabrication. And this idea that, and years ago when we first started TAD, the first project was a museum project in an historical building. And the first thing they said to us
Oh,
was, do not put anything on the wall. We're like, well, what can I do? They said, well, you can layer on the wall, just don't hurt my wall. I'm like, okay, fine. So we went back and we created these beautiful designs with, like, bronze housings, beautifully lined up. And at the time, this was 15 years ago, we were using these kind of like, seamless screens and portrait, this 3-screen experience. And, we kind of mounted it and we actually lined it up with this beautiful line that was on the floor that went to the front door. And between working with an interior designer and a really good branding consultant who does signage and graphics for a living, the relationship between door and wall was really well thought out, and it just looked like it'd been there for 100 years. And this idea that it doesn't always have to be built into sheetrock, right? These screens and things do change. And when I go to a pantry and I see a sad little 36-inch screen blasting whatever, some TV channel, I'm like, oh, that's so sad. And it's got a little cable tangling out there. The rest of the pantry has other things. It has millwork, it has other bits and bobs around there. Why is it not thought of as a part of holistic design? So I think, without rambling on too much, I feel like we're never afraid to think outside of the construction itself and think of signage, fabrication, metalwork, as a kind of another layer. And I know for the last few years, we've been working more closely with fabricators to build these types of experiences. And when you think about a lot of these spaces, there's not just one screen, there's 50 of them, and let's get into a groove. And obviously cost comes into play, but you don't have to spend tons of money either to make this pretty and as a part of the architecture.
Yeah, and I think our mount partners out who are going to end up watching at some point are going to appreciate that sentiment as well, because it's one of those things that I want something that's aesthetically pleasing. I think that's why we're seeing more of a trend. And and you highlighted it a couple times, intentional or otherwise, about how consumer trends drove commercial trends and how we wanted, and before everybody panics out on the call, no, I'm not going to accidentally trigger anybody's home assistant. But it's, we've all gotten used to these kinds of experiences, and it's driving how we now want our office spaces to work and conference rooms. Well, I think it's kind of the same thing with this to a certain extent, where we see like the picture frame TVs. When I was at Sony's Roadshow last week, they had one of their partners there, I think it was Leon, in fact, that was showing off a picture frame functionality system for the Pro Bravia products. And it looked fantastic because it no longer looks like a TV. And now you've got the matte screen surface, you've got art on it, so it can really blend into the home. Well, that's not a big leap to what you're describing here, and how we can better make our technology blend into the space and look like it belongs, rather than something we built this beautiful space and now we slapped something on the wall on top, right? And I think that's a really important concept. One thing I do want to explore a little bit, because I know we're going to come up on time and we could talk for probably another 3 hours. I do always try to ask 2 questions when we get a guest on. And one is going to be, what kind of trends and new innovations are you seeing that are going to be relevant for experiential design within the digital signage space over the next few years?
Wow. I think that's a great question. I would have to say, one of the trends I think is definitely going to be more around sustainability. Where a lot of people that are not educated in technology look at screens and think, my God, that thing is just chomping up power. There's come a time where we don't think about our fridge working anymore, but everyone, I know, because it just sits there whirring away in the background. It's been a flash. But there's
there's something we don't think about it.
Right, but with TVs and various other things, this kind of notion that at 10 o'clock at night we turn it off when we go to bed type of thing, right? It's always just kind of this religious thing that we always do in the household to kind of save electricity. I feel that one of the trends that I'm probably going to start seeing is the lifespan of this technology. Number one, right, is visual is a science, as you well know, being a consultant, right? So there's plenty of formulas to kind of work out what's the appropriate size for a screen and font size, right? If that is the case, then I know that my 3-foot by 5-foot screen is perfect. It doesn't need any more than that. I believe that the future will be that it will be a very simple canvas where the electronics and the software simply gets updated every 5 years, and we're not changing out the whole thing, right? So,
Ooh, I like that.
so signage, if you look at, here in New York, right, one of the great things, you can walk around New York City and find signage that's been around for absolute, 150 years, and it's still in use today, whether it be the subway system to the great fallout shelters after the Second World War, they're all still there. And, I do believe that's going to be a time and a place, because we can't keep swapping out things every 4 to 5 years. I mean, the typical technology refresh program is 5 years, right? So that just seems terrible to me. Like, oh, out in the landfill it goes, another one comes in. So being a little bit more holistic, and that goes back to the aesthetic question as well, right? So if it's housed in this beautiful bronze cladding or whatever it is, it's going to be timeless, and that'll be something. I think the other part of it that we're going to start seeing is, I'm going to ramble on for a little bit here, but I feel, integrated camera technology is something we're going to start seeing. It's already here, right? We've already seen manufacturers starting to embed, tiny little cameras on 1 pixel, as an example, right? So this idea that, you don't have to have over, a lot of periphery pieces, hanging on your screen. But I think it'll become more intelligent for, proximity and using AI. I'm going to say it right, that, our profiles and everything else, right? We're very dependent on this kind of IT triangulation to try and figure out that John's walking up to the screen. No, it's going to be facial recognition. It's going to know what I'm doing and know what I want to do. So I feel that, this is where I have this kind of long dialogue about AI, right? You can break it up into so many different things. When it comes to true AV, like camera technology and microphone technology has been using AI for like 10 years, right? It's like proximity-based tracking and various other things. We've been doing this a long time.
Everything, yeah. We take that for granted almost now.
Take it for granted. That was early AI, So the AV industry, once again, is ahead of the curve. But this kind of idea of integrated technology built in, I think, is going to be incredibly important. So like camera technology built in. I think it's going to be very hard for sound, but sound has been done in so many different ways now, behind the screen, kind of embedded in the screen, or is it a separate device? But how do I make that screen easier to be deployed, its lifespan, and how do I make it AI ready? But then the other part of it is going to be probably in the CMS side and the content delivery side, right? This idea that there is probably going to be more, there's probably going to be more mergers in regards to, and we've already seen it in the marketplace over the last 5-6 years, where app companies, CMS companies, reservation booking companies, coupled by large conglomerates, can kind of get together to deliver more holistic solutions for people. Right. And that's good business for us, Jonathan, because now it might become more streamlined because one company is offering multiple things, but it's going to come at a price point. So right. Now this kind of idea of validating like who's the right fit for whom is going to come into play. Everybody has something that they can promote against their competitor, right? There's always a differentiator out there, and finding those differentiators are going to be harder now. But I do see that there's going to be more tie-ups within the industry between BMS and CMS and various other things out there to deliver these kind of more intuitive, tailored, environmental, solutions for people. So without getting too into it, obviously there's going to be, we are seeing more curvature displays, we're seeing more concaves, but that's a whole nother discussion in regards to shape forming. I think
sure.
People don't want to see, I put a 21 by 9 screen into somebody's office and they're like, what is that? And it's still getting people excited, and if I turn it on, if I moved it 90 degrees, it's even more exciting. So I think we're going to start seeing canvases be a little different because we've been so locked into the film format that, can we just change it a little bit so it doesn't look like a 16 by 9 screen hanging on a white wall? Right?
We tune out that 16 by 9 aspect ratio because we see it so much. Yeah. So you see your first, the starting proliferation of 21 by 9 conference room screens, and you walk in and it's wider, or the ultra wide desktops, it's just wider. And that's been one of
Yeah.
the things I think been helping with DV-LED adoption, which I know we could talk for an hour about that. But it's been helping with DV-LED adoption has been that it's unusual canvas. So I think you're really spot on with that. You hit the other one I was going to ask, which was about AI. So we came to it naturally. There's that buzzword bingo thing again.
Yeah, we'll end it there.
Yeah, we will, because we could go on, but I do want to do one quick thing before we open it up to questions from
Yeah.
our audience, because I do want to be respectful of your time and try and end up on time. Because again, we could probably talk forever. We'll have to follow up with a couple of these points and continue our chat offline. But before we go to Q&A, I always ask my guests for a small favor for our audience members. If you could leave our audience with 2 or 3 key takeaways from our discussion today, what would they be?
I think we'll go back to our earlier point, right? It's, it doesn't matter if you're a consultant, an end user, somebody that's, I mean, the new title of, chief experience officers are becoming more and more popular within the industry today, right? So I think always going back to the design process, right? And don't overcomplicate it, right? To start with discovery and define, develop it out, and then deploy it. Think about your personas. Always go back and don't overcomplicate your personas. I find a lot of people say, they'll come back with like, 200 personas. No, let's dial it back. It's guest, visitor, whatever, real estate, whoever it's going to be. And then really think about those touch points, right? Think of it as a journey. Digital signage is a journey, right? And when you map out the journey from left to right, you will see those points of engagement, and just think to yourself, okay, what would that person or that persona want to be engaging with at that moment? Is it small, medium, and large? Is it interactive? Is it not? Is it intuitive? Is it just a direction? And I think that's, and then it becomes a useful tool for your enterprise. I would say that the other tip is think about more fabricated environments today, right? Work with your mounting companies, your fabrication companies. There's a lot of great ones out there, because it makes the architect's life easier, the GC's life easier, and then it can become more, it's easily deployed. Think about your deployment methodology, right? Did I have to cut open a wall, or did I just lean something with a couple of Z clips and plug something in and run? So think about the distribution model. I would also, today, I find a lot of places that we're working with are enterprise and portfolio based. Don't think of your signage as a silo, right? It's a, there's a lot of corporations and companies today where the workforce is so distributed, and you've got small, medium, and large offices. Make sure that digital signage experience is the same, no matter if it's a small office or the headquarters. I think there's that equity. There's an equity standpoint here in digital signage as well, right? Don't put the big shiny stuff just on the executive floor, right? It's it should be really throughout. So there's this kind of equity positioning in digital signage as well.
Outstanding. All right, so we got some questions from the audience, and if any of you do have any additional questions, again, type them in the Q&A or throw them in the chat. We'll see if we can get to all of them with our time remaining. But we have a couple of really good ones here, and I'm really intrigued to ask these to you, John, so I think this will be good.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with one here. A lot of people think of experiential design as things companies like Moment Factory do for entertainment and cultural venues. Ooh, good point. Great stuff. But how can you think about experiential approach of a Moment Factory, but on a modest budget? Ooh. Oh, I'm not sure how I'd answer that one. Oh.
I mean, yeah. So, yeah, this is where that word experiential design is being thrown around a lot, right? And it makes sense that, Moment Factory deserve that title, right? Because they design holistic experiences at a film quality level, right? There's this, it's next level. It reminds me of David Niles when he did the Comcast building, right? It's next level experiential design. I think you take moments of that, right? For me, if I was going to take a Moment Factory approach, right, it would be a smaller display, right? Once again, think about the UX experience. Don't be so focused on a very web format, utilitarian kind of Squarespace style, tool. Think about, years ago when, the Calm app came out, right? Its logos and its font and its boot up process was just more organic in flow. So think about your color and choices there, and think about what's on trend and what's nice for humans to engage with. So hard contrasting colors, not good. So think about, what that could look like. But when you take a Moment Factory piece about it, it's, what if it's backlit? What if it has, looks like it's floating aesthetically, right? A lot of people have always been obsessed with Terrell, right? The famous lighting artist, right? And a lot of people have kind of coined that. They've put, really cool RGB lights behind the display. In fact, I think Sony did this years ago, right? They had the display where if I'm watching a football match, it glowed green. So, it's you could really work it in, because a lot of these signage environments are typically in darker spaces. They're not in lit spaces like a workplace. They're in these kind of transition spaces. So you have an opportunity to kind of illuminate it and kind of beautify it. And I think that's, because a lot of the Moment Factory stuff is not necessarily fully interactive. It's more of this beautiful visual backdrop, Cirque du Soleil style environment that's all encompassing. So, smaller scale, I think about light, sound, right? So when I interface with something, is there a beautiful sound? So everybody thinks about video and digital signage, but forgets that sound element, the other part of the human experience. So, yeah.
I was going to ask a question about sound later on, so you got a good one there. And I appreciate you bringing up the idea of backlighting, because bias lighting is a huge concept in home theater, and it's equally as valid in signage. And I think people overlook that. And there are really good low-cost manufacturers that you can get products now that are reliable, that you can backlight displays for very little incremental cost. So I think that's a good point. So I got another good one here for you. And this is going to tie into, I think we touched on it, but has the advent of more affordable large palette LED screens made the design of experiential easier to do and changed how we think of the CMS, since large palette LED often needs different kinds of content engines? Ooh, that's another good one.
Yeah, this is going to be a big challenge going forward, because what we were talking about earlier, and I get excited again, we talked about 21:9 screens, like, oh my God, right? The advent of LED has created us this beautiful environment where all shapes and sizes are available to us, right? So, yeah, actually, the headquarters of TAD here, we have a full portal design as you walk through, and the rotating doors, double-sided LED. We've gone a little nuts there, but you know what it does? It actually creates opportunities and job opportunities, because the emphasis on content is going to be incredible. Creating templates and template design for those LEDs. So a couple of things here. One, that journey I was talking about earlier, right? Well, I wouldn't put that unusual LED design at every interstitial, but I would put it at the end, or as there's always the milk is at the back of the store, right? And I've actually noticed a lot of corporations do this, so they've done it wrong, where they go out with a huge media lobby wall, and you're like, wow. Then you get to the multi-purpose room, there's a projection hanging up there, and you're like, well, what happened here? You put all your money into the lobby? There's nothing here in my projection. So, yeah, exactly, right? So think about signage as iterations of experiences, going from like zero to hero, right? And when I think about that LED, reserve your money for that. Think about what that LED could also do in addition to just signage. So if it is, during the morning hours, this beautiful environment, which, yes, it's going to be a big challenge for CMS. So how does a CMS system, deal with 80% standard format, and then all of a sudden it's got this really crazy, unusual format? That goes into the question of like evaluating your CMS partner is so critical. And who is managing that content, who updates it, right? That is this workflow, and understanding that is an incredibly important part of the process. But that LED, I think, just, I would say go for it. We're at that time and age, it's become more affordable, but think about how you can utilize that LED for something else other than signage. Can it become your town hall space? Can it become something else? So I don't know if that necessarily answers the question. There are lots of bits and bobs there, but I kind of hopefully answered some of it.
No, that's great, and we've been getting a ton of great questions, and I know we're a little bit over time. Do you mind doing one more?
Yeah, absolutely.
No. Okay, awesome.
I'm good.
So this is one that I think is going to be really interesting. because you're part of the ecosystem that's being asked about here. But where does the digital experience project start with? Owner, architects, AV design firms. Yes, that's Tad right there. I'll give you a shameless plug this time. When does the digital signage integrator come into the picture? How and who do we develop that business relationship with? That I think it's a really good one. That's going to be puzzling for a lot of people when
Yeah.
they come in and they're just a
Yeah.
digital signage integrator.
Right. Well, I think about the hierarchy, or not the hierarchy, but the kind of like the list of people that you have to work with, right? I think the thing with digital signage is blending real estate with technology people, right? And that's been an old thing in our industry for many years, right, Jonathan? It's like getting those two parties to be aligned. Because real estate, management will work with architects and designers, and potentially will have this amazing looking vision. The vision then drops on somebody that's managing the technology's desk, and you're like, wait, what happened here? This is like a $70 million project. And then then there's that back and forth, and that's when you engage with a consultant or an integrator to start figuring out, okay, let's break this down. Okay. And then again, it has to start with the design process. You've got to say, like, what is the signage for? What is its purpose? And I would say today, digital signage, a lot of the time, if you look at corporate, right, there's sometimes a retail component to that corporation, but a lot of the time it will fall back to brand and marketing, and they're the ones that are very conscientious of the look and the feel and the message that's going out. Then there's HR. So HR now is incredibly involved in, well, wait a minute, what are we saying? And how are we saying it?
Yeah.
And then there is the technology group, right? The kind of everyone running up to the CTO level that's thinking about, I've got to run an infrastructure. What is my user engagement? Is the same digital signage going on my mobile phone? Like, so I think those are the, people that we have to engage with quickly. But a lot of the time, I feel real estate, they hold the cards to the money and the budget of doing an airport renovation or a big building renovation or a new hospital. And then at some point, the designer or the integrator has to get involved at that point, and I think then you're having more of an agnostic approach to the design. And then once that's figured out, I think working quite quickly with a CMS vendor and your endpoint vendor and your fabricator is the next stage after that. And then, you have to start with somebody that can basically project manage or hold all of the people accountable within that process.
That is, I think, the most concise explanation I've heard of that entirely horrific herding of cats process. So thank you. Really, really appreciate that. All right, so I know we're at time, went a few minutes over, but this has been outstanding. First of all, John, I'd like to say thank you for spending some of your time today with us and our audience, sharing your expertise. Really enjoyed the conversation. Like I said a couple times, I think we could go on for hours, but for anybody who wants to learn more about what TAD does, let's give you a chance to give a shout out before we thank our sponsors and wrap up.
I have the longest website in the world, but so it's technologyarchitecturedesign.com. So it's basically TAD spelled out. So so just so I'm John.Reeves, and we can kind of post that out there, and you can see us on LinkedIn, or just friend us on LinkedIn, and I'll definitely kind of respond to any questions that you have there. We're always available. As I say, we're both sides of the Atlantic. I'm the expat living in New York, but it's often back in the UK. So we're always available, and we enjoy talking about this stuff. And I have really enjoyed talking to you, Jonathan. And notice the Sony box that somebody's standing in front
of. I was going to say, yeah, you get the.
We managed to get got a Sony plug going on. So
absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. Nice segue, by the way. We didn't plan that in advance either, but I do have to thank our sponsor, Sony, for helping us put these together. Without them, this series would not be possible. And of course, to all of our audience members, thank you all for spending time with us today. We hope this has been valuable. Again, please continue to offer us feedback, suggest topics. We love hearing it. And then just one last time, John, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate your time today. And we hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Thanks for being here, folks.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Cheers. Take care.
Thank you.